OnTheGrid Podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the new series, the On The Grid Podcast. We are back with another episode. We're obviously going to be reviewing the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, which in essence was a very dangerous one. It could have been very dangerous because of what was happening over there, but fortunately it was safe and we saw a relatively good race. I'm your host, Adrian Kita. I'm joined by my lovely co-host, Harvey Todd, and a special guest for this episode. Ethan Evans has joined us from his home. He's currently got COVID, but he's a warrior. He does what he wants. He's a legend, and he's come onto this podcast to review the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. So I think what better place to start off with, talk about Q1 and Nicholas Latifi bringing out the red flag. Ethan, sum it up.
Well, I think it's just Nicholas Latifi things at this stage, isn't it? He's becoming a bit of a known for crashing this season. I think that's his second and third crashes this season. He crashed in Bahrain, I believe, as well. So it doesn't look good for Latifi. He seems to be outperformed a bit by Albon, but yeah, all's not well at Williams.
And just before we end the segment on Nicholas Latifi, we spoke about obviously cutting his airtime a bit shorter because last season we were telling him to go faster as he was improving and trying to get closer to potentially a couple of top 10 finishes. But this time it could be a worse season for Latifi this time around. Obviously, we're only two rounds in, but Harvey, it's not looking good.
Right, last year my plea to Latifi was go faster. This year, it's keep it in between those white lines on each side of the track. That's your job. Keep it on the black stuff. You'll be good to go.
I think that's the key for Nicholas Latifi going forward. But let's look at the bottom 5 of Q1. Big shock. Obviously, we've got to talk about him. 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton, unable to get his Mercedes car out of qualifying one. Ethan, we've got to go to you. We know you're the resident Lewis Hamilton fan in the building. Your thoughts and opinions on obviously seeing your favourite driver unable to make it through to Q2.
Well, I saw a stat on Saturday. It said it's the first time Hamilton has failed to get out of Q1 on pure pace since 2009, which is a remarkable statistic. But yeah, as you said, it's not a good result at all for Hamilton, especially as Russell, I think, finished P4 in that session. Obviously, there were some differences set up and he couldn't maximise it or find any sort of pace. But yeah, it's not a fun time to be a Lewis Hamilton fan. That's all I'll say.
And Harvey, going to you regarding Lewis Hamilton, obviously you were probably the delighted of the two between you and Ethan seeing Hamilton unable to make it through to Q2. But with that being said, the Mercedes doesn't look comfortable in Lewis Hamilton's hands so far. Obviously, he did get a podium one round ago in Bahrain, but this time around in Saudi Arabia, it just didn't look stable. It didn't look under control, and obviously Lewis Hamilton was kind of hampered by that.
Yeah, I was looking at the onboard of his lap, and it looked a very difficult drive. The car didn't look at one with him, and P16, but it's weird seeing Russell get so high up as Ethan mentioned in the session P4. Something's got to be wrong.
Well, something clearly has to be wrong on Hamilton's end. Moving on to Alex Albon P17, his Williams partner Nicholas Latifi crashed to bring out the red flag and obviously only qualified P19. But Harvey, going back to you, Albon's looking okay, but that Williams car doesn't look like it's going to be fantastic. It doesn't look like it's going to be world beating. Last season's car, fair enough. A few appearances, Q2, Q3, top 10 finishes. But this season, we may see Williams on the brink of the top 10, but I think they'll settle for anything between 11th and 20th at this rate.
Yeah, I mean, it was one we were sort of predicting last year. Could Williams be a dark horse? And obviously that one's, at the moment, not coming through to fruition. Like you say, Albon's definitely doing the better of the two. He's keeping it between the white lines. And P17 ahead of the Aston isn't bad, but yeah, it could be better. but it's not disastrous, is it?
Just to jump onto the point you made there, ahead of the Aston Martins, that's correct, but only one. Obviously, Nico Hulkenberg still stepping in for Sebastian Vettel, who's still not returned a negative COVID test. It's obviously going to be hard for Nico Hulkenberg to bed himself into the sport. It's been quite a while since he's been out. He had a race in Bahrain. He's had to kind of pick up the pieces at the start of the season for the positive case of Sebastian Vettel. But I mean, I don't think you're expecting a lot from your reserve driver, especially when he's not able to qualify out of a first session.
No, I think it's difficult for Nico Hulkenberg because I think the Aston Martin, as long as with the Williams we've mentioned, is probably the two weakest cars on the grid at the moment. But when you're talking about Nico Hulkenberg, comparing him to Lance Stroll, who's been in that car now for, is this his fourth year at Aston Martin? He's not actually done too badly. It's been very similar. He got beaten last weekend in Bahrain, but this weekend in Saudi, he held his own and he actually beat him in the race. I know obviously Stroll had that crash, but overall I don't think Hulkenberg's done too badly against his teammate.
We'll talk about the race a bit more as the episode progresses, but rounding off bottom five of qualifying one, it was Lewis Hamilton in 16th, Albon 17th, Hulkenberg 18th, Latifi 19th, and Yuki Tsunoda not setting a time in P20. Let's move on to Q2, and I think the biggest kind of talking point from that session was Mick Schumacher hitting the concrete barrier. It brought a lot of shock around the world, around the sport, because we didn't know what was happening. Obviously, Gunther Steiner explained later in an interview that all of the radio and stuff was shut down and they weren't able to communicate with Mick, which was obviously quite scary. But Mick's okay. Unfortunately, he's not had any broken bones or he's sore and whatnot. He seems okay. But Harvey, it kind of alerted us that potentially that curb on the corner should not be there, because it's given most of the drivers, if not all, a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple of sessions in quali afterwards. There was the F2 race, and then there was the F1 race after, and it wasn't pleasant watching cars fly over that curb. I mean, thankfully they all stayed on four wheels, but there's been numerous people who've been caught out there. Ken Bullock-Bassi and Cordeal in F2 were caught out. They were forced to miss sessions. Ocon had a near miss straight after pretty much, and then Sainz had two lucky escapes, except he went the other way. Curb's just not safe. You either need a much lower curb or you just completely remove it. Why that curb was there on Sunday morning after what happened on Friday and Saturday, I will never know.
Ethan, are you with similar opinions regarding that curb? I don't think it should be there. I just think it's very, very unsafe. Plus, if the curb is there, at least put a tyre wall there and not a concrete one, because it's caught out so many drivers. I think it caught out a lot of drivers last year as well. So it's a really dangerous curb that I think me and Harvey and probably yourself think that curb should not be there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with the both of you. But I think it also reflects on the circuit. The circuit's not safe. How many red flags have we seen just across F1 over this season and last year's race? I don't think we should be racing in Saudi Arabia, not just because of the circuit, but you know, it's a fast flowing, it's easy on the eye, but when it goes wrong, no matter the incident, you've pretty much all the time you've got to have a safety car or a red flag. So I don't think it's a very safe circuit to be racing at.
Moving on to the two Mclarens of Lando Norris and Daniel Ricardo, we've obviously seen an improvement in those two drivers this time around, P11 and P12 in qualifying. I think McLaren struggled, not last weekend, the weekend before in Bahrain. They generally struggled a lot. But this weekend, it kind of looked like they're back in their groove somewhat.
Yeah, most definitely. I think, obviously, Bahrain, caught everybody out. We knew the McLaren had their troubles in testing, but we didn't realise how bad they were. So, yeah, it was nice to see some improvement from Lando, getting very close to Q3. But his post-race interview, which made me chuckle a little bit, where he said, yeah, but on the next circle, we might just be as bad as we were in Bahrain. So, yeah, there's progress, but we'll have to wait and see. It might just be it's a circuit thing.
And then, obviously, we had Guan Yu Zhou in P13 with Lance Stroll in P15. Harvey, just touching base on Guan Yu Zhou, going into the sport for your first ever season, first ever Chinese driver in the sport, there's obviously going to be a lot of pressure and a lot of eyes in his home country looking at him, seeing what he can deliver for the nation. But he's generally been coping very well. I think 2 Q2 appearances. Obviously, Bottas has made Q3 on both occasions so far this season. But Q2 for Guan Yu Zhou isn't bad at all.
No, I think compared to his much more experienced teammate, I think he's doing a very good job for a rookie. I mentioned last week that maybe when he came in, a lot of people were expecting him to be quite poor. And I think the only weakness that he's shown so far is his race starts. And I think his qualifying pace has been tremendous.
Absolutely agreed. Let's round off bottom 5 in Q2 in that case. Norris, Ricardo, Zhou, Schumacher and Stroll with bottom 5 in that session. Moving on to Q3, we obviously saw the 2 Ferraris flying through that session, but an unlikely man stole the top spot. It's Checo Perez gaining his first ever pole position for the number 11 car, first time in 11 years. Harvey, how delighted are you for Checo? It was a long time coming for his first ever pole position, but I think he delivered an absolutely fantastic lap when it mattered.
Yeah, I couldn't have put it better myself. If you were to mark it out at 10, it'd be a solid 10. Checo's one of them drivers that I think a lot of people say, well, qualifying is his biggest weakness. And, to put it on pole, he put him up for such a good race, and I'm sure we'll get onto it later, but terrible luck. But in terms of quali, round of applause, please. Round of applause. It was fantastic.
It was a brilliant lap, and he delivered a monumental lap to be obviously Charles Leclerc. It was very tight between those two. Obviously Leclerc in P2, Carlos Sainz P3. We'll touch base on Max Verstappen because it's very unlikely to see that man not on the front row of the grid. Obviously qualified P4, which he would have felt like a bit unlucky. But with that being said, Ethan, I think P4 for Verstappen isn't necessarily too bad. Obviously, with rapid Ferraris ahead of him and his more experienced, could you say, teammate out in front?
No, I think I have to disagree there. I think P4 is about as bad as it can get for Verstappen. I don't think there's any danger of him qualifying outside the top 4 because the Red Bull and Ferrari are by far the quickest car. So yeah, I think P4 is probably just as bad as it can get. And as Harvey had his moment where talking about Lewis Hamilton in P16, I can kind of get a little bit back with Verstappen being the worst out of the top 4. Small wins. But yeah, I don't think it was Verstappen's day. He didn't have a good first run. The second run was a little bit off the pace. But at the end of the day, he made up for it in the race.
Right, you two, stop hickering and bickering already. It's recording a podcast with 2 children. These days. Yeah, Verstappen obviously P4. Let's move on to Esteban Ocon in P5. Another kind of huge step for Alpine with Alonso in P7. Harvey, were you impressed that the Alpine were able to get into the top 5? Because Russell wasn't too far behind, but Alpine have shown that they do have fight in them and that they can and will reach Q3 and top 5 with relative ease, I think.
Yeah, I think if we base it off the 2 rounds now, we've got that little bit more of a relative pace. You'd probably say that Alpine are top of the midfield. I've been really impressed, and I think they have gone under the radar a little bit because they're not a, in quote, huge team. If it was someone like an Alfa Romeo, I think we'd hear a lot more about it. But now I think Ocon and Alonso, to be honest, both in the top 7 this week. And I want to say they were top 8 last week as well, the both of them. So no, I think, yeah, Alpine, I think, have certainly in these early stages cemented themselves at the top of midfield.
Just to confirm, they were not in the top 8 last weekend. It was Alonso was 8th, but Ocon qualified 11th for that race. So yeah, the stat was wrong. The stat man has been outplayed.
Yeah, well, I know absolutely nothing about this sport. I just waffle.
That's what he does. He's speaking the truth there. All he does is waffle about this sport. But I mean, don't we all? We like a bit of waffling on these podcast episodes, so it's all good. But moving on to, I think, another good performance in Q3 was from George Russell. I think he proved that maybe the Mercedes car can be inside the top 10. Maybe Lewis Hamilton can't, but he can. Russell's been impressive so far this season, in the absence of Hamilton inside the top 10. But whenever it is necessary, Russell has carried the Mercedes team very well.
Yeah, I think he got a little bit of slack after qualifying in Bahrain, because he qualified ninth, because he made a mistake on his flying lap, and everyone was saying he's on fraud watch. But I think he's performed pretty well so far. Of course, he made a mistake in Bahrain, but in Saudi, I think he probably extracted just about the maximum performance. He was out-qualified by a very good Alpine car. So yeah, the Alpine had the pace on a slack weekend.
Obviously, he was sandwiched in between the Alpines, with Ocon in 5th, Russell 6th, Alonso 7th, a very good Bottas in 8th, Gasly 9th, and Kevin Magnussen in the Haas in 10th. Looking at the race, though, I think there's only one debate we can have, and that is Verstappen versus Leclerc. I mean, wow. It was a battle that lasted quite a few laps. They obviously battled for the DRS zone, even locking up and braking. It was a crazy battle. But Harvey, your man came out on top. Verstappen came out on top. GG from a Leclerc fan. GG. It was a good race. But I think this battle in Saudi Arabia is only a taster of what's to come in the future rounds.
100%. I absolutely love Charles Leclerc. I think he's brilliant. He's a hard racer. But yeah, I really didn't mind how that battle ended last night. As we're recording this on the Monday, as long as Charles didn't take Max out or Max didn't take Charles out, as long as it was decided fairly, I did not mind which way it went, because both thoroughly deserved the win, and Max just came out on top.
Narrowly, barely. He only just got on the top step of the podium. But Ethan, just to touch upon base on the Verstappen versus Leclerc battle, it was a very tasty battle that lasted a couple of laps, and it could have gone either way, but it came out with a Red Bull on top. What did you make of the battle between Charles and Max?
Yeah, it was, as you've both said, it was fantastic to watch. It was great racing between the two of them. And if this is a sign of things to come for the rest of the season, as I'm pretty sure it will be, I think I might have to be a bit of a mediator at times between the two of you. It was a great battle, and both drivers deserved the win.
Yeah, let's talk about the tactics. But before we talk about the tactics, we obviously saw Harvey with his top three predictions. Well, top three, he got them correct. The top three race predictions. It was a great performance. Carlos Sainz obviously in P3.
I forgot to mention when we were talking about Verstappen and Leclerc, what I noticed that between these last two races is DRS is far too overpowered. Like, moves are getting done halfway down the straight, not even into the braking zone. It's just a smidge overpowered. But no, that's my little DRS rant over.
DRS OP. We don't like OP DRS. Nerf DRS now. Make racing fun again.
Can the FIA do like a mid-season patch and just nerf DRS a little bit and like boost like tired egg and just make that a little bit more overpowered?
I mean, I'll get on the phone to them after we record this episode for sure, and I'll see what I can do. Moving on to Carlos Sainz in P3, it was for him. I think it was a bit of a lonely race. The two ahead of him were kind of blasted past him, and see ya, jobs are good. But he obviously had a keen Sergio Perez behind him. Ethan, another podium for the Spaniard, more points for Ferrari. End of the day, happy days.
Yeah, most definitely. If they keep getting two drivers on the podium, I don't think many Ferrari fans are going to have too many complaints. But something I did expect from Sainz actually was him to seem to appear as more of the second driver. I thought he'd be right up there with Leclerc, which hasn't obviously occurred in these first two races. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves over the season. But I think there's work to do for Carlos at this moment in time.
Yeah, most definitely. Podiums are a good thing to get, but they're obviously wanting to battle for race victories. I think he had a bit of a problem during the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix with a gear shift problem. I think that's what he reported on the radio. Anyway, I don't know if it's absolutely concrete correct. He could be just saying that, and it could be a whole lot different. But that being said, we'll move on to Checo Perez, the unlucky man. Obviously, we started talking about the tactics, and I think we continue to talk about the tactics because Ferrari called a very good bluff, sent Checo into the pits. Safety car comes out, and the man ends up in P4, and it's what could have been a race victory ends up not even a podium.
Yeah, I think definitely on course for a podium. That's the luck of the draw. At the end of the day, they went motor racing. Safety car came out. You don't know what's around the corner, and especially at tracks like Jeddah, especially with drivers like Latifi on track. But no, it is what it is. Red Bull have been blessed. You could say last year at the end, overall, I wouldn't say karma, but it's like you get a bit of good luck, you get a bit of bad luck at the same time. It is what it is, really.
Absolutely spot on. But obviously we had a very good Mercedes of George Russell in P5. I think he extracted the most out of that car, and he couldn't have done much more. Perez was miles away. I think Perez was like 22 seconds of the road, which is mental. Which is mental to think that the top four kind of ran away with it, and Russell was just there, top of the mid pack in P5. Ocon finished behind him just in P6 after his little battle with Lando Norris, who finished P7. Let's touch upon Lando Norris a bit here because it's points for McLaren finally, about time. 6 points in the bag for them and 6 points for Lando Norris. Ethan, after what was a poor start for them, it's turned out to be a steady progress in the right direction.
Yeah, I'd say it was a very solid race for McLaren. I think it's, they're unfortunate not to get P6 at the end there, but I think it's as good as they could really hope for. I don't think they would have expected to be fighting for P6 when the lights went out. But, Norris has consistently showed good speed in McLaren. He's a top talent, and I'm sure that they're working hard behind the scenes to get that car fixed. And I think, it's definitely promising signs for them. Hopefully they can continue this form into Australia.
Rounding out the points finishers, we had Pierre Gasly in 8th, Magnussen in 9th, and Lewis Hamilton in 10th. We have Guan Yu Zhou, Nico Hulkenberg, and Lance Stroll. The rest of the finishers for DNFs, Alex Albon, Valtteri Bottas, Fernando Alonso, Daniel Ricciardo, and Nicholas Latifi, with Yuki Tsunoda and Mick Schumacher not starting the race. But that's all for episode 2 of On the Grid podcast this week. We'll be back next week doing our predictions, a little bit of a preview ahead of Melbourne. The first time in what seems a long time that we finally visiting Albert Park. Make sure to check out our Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, all that good stuff at On the Grid Pod and On the Grid Podcast. We are also setting up a F1 Fantasy League. Keep your eyes peeled on social media for that, as we'll be getting that up to date live. And there could be some prizes at the end of the league for whoever finishes inside the top 3. So we'll make sure to keep you guys posted on social media. Thank you, Ethan and Harvey, for joining me on this episode. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.